Walk us through kind of your initial take on this trade or potential trade talk happening in Switzerland between the United States and China after a little bit of, I want to say, silence from both sides in terms of coming to some sort of agreement.
I think silence is an understatement, and I think the fact that this is happening neither in Beijing or Washington or in somewhere else is sort of interesting. It may indicate that both sides are still posturing before they get into any kind of substantive conversation. That's my take.
When it comes to that substantive conversation, though, where does it even begin? What do you think is the number one issue, given that there's questions around intellectual property, there's questions around tech, there's questions around tariffs, not to mention the political support for, well, now India, Pakistan, the support between Russia, Ukraine, and other kind of hotspots around the world. Where do those conversations in Switzerland begin?
I think you're quite right to put it in that broad context, because the agenda is quite full there, and these other issues that you just mentioned are preoccupying people. So I think it's up to the U.S., frankly, rather than China, to try to dive deep into what can the U.S. do to satisfy Mr. Trump and his friends about reducing, the trade war between China and the U.S. I don't know if you saw the Treasury Secretary yesterday testifying before the Hill on questions like this. It was quite a stunning display of sort of inability to read a room politically, let alone sort of making any substantive context about what's going on. So the Chinese, I know them quite well. I've worked there for years. They're not stupid, and I think they're going to wonder what is going on in this meeting. That's my guess. Of course, we'll see ex post whether or not my hypothesis is correct or not.
Harry, what do you think the Chinese want from the meeting? How are they approaching it? Give us a sense of what you think they're going to be looking at as they approach this process.
Well, as many people know, the Chinese take a very long view of things, and I think that's the view that they're going to take and are taking with respect to Washington. I also think they have a pretty good read on Mr. Trump from his first term, and they know that he can be quite erratic. My guess is they're going to let him talk and let the team, his side, talk most, and then they are going to react. I would be surprised if they begin by putting any proposal on the table. I think they really want to hear once and for all what really is behind Mr. Trump's moves. Because yesterday, in the conversation that Mr. Trump had with Mr. Carney, it was quite interesting that he didn't even mention tariffs or any kind of trade discussions whatsoever. I'm sure the Chinese saw that, the press readout of that, and I'm sure they're sort of scratching their head. What is going to take place in Switzerland?
Yep. So set expectations for me. Financial markets are going to be on tenterhooks. We are going to build up to this process throughout the week. As we were mentioning earlier, it's Fed Day. We're barely talking about it. We have a really interesting development. We don't know quite how to read it. What do you think expectations should be? What is a win here? What should generate a positive market reaction, and what do you think should generate a negative market reaction?
Well, on the win side, and let's go to the tail of the distribution, a real win would be sort of a simmering or a cessation of trade hostilities between the two. That the prospects of that are less than negative, if I can say. I think the real outcome is going to be, let's have further talks. That is likely to be the outcome of these kinds of sessions. It would be striking, given how I know China, that there's going to be a resolution, any kind of meaningful resolution by this first engagement. This is more of a table-setting discussion, is my sense.
Harry, good morning. We heard from President Trump yesterday. He was talking about how he thinks he's going to set the terms. He says he'll set the terms for these trade deals. I wonder whether that will play out okay for certain partners, for certain trade conversations, but I wonder how that goes down with China.
It will not go down well with China. And I think, it's striking that he's being so assertive on this, because, as I say, the most recent, meeting with the head of state yesterday with Carney was he did not seem interested at all, Mr. Trump, in trade at all. I mean, he really did not dive deep substantively, and I'm not sure that his deputies in this meeting, have a leash that allows them to dive deep. So I think if there's no resolution, if sort of going on as usual, that's probably the most likely outcome. There may be some kind of titular, fig leaf put on the conversations, but I don't think that there are going to be any substantive outcomes coming from this.
Harry, outside the United States, we've seen the UK and India agree to a trade deal over the past 48 hours, and not to go to all of the detail of that, which might be outside of your area of interest. But I wonder how you react to the idea that we're seeing other parts of the world do trade deals, ones that have been unavailable, it seems, for a very long time. And I wonder if the presence of President Trump and the tension that he is providing to global trade, whether that is driving others to find common ground.
Absolutely, and I think the UK-India deal is an important one. I do think he's going to wonder, well, how come other countries are being able to engage in trade negotiations and I'm not? That's going to be sort of from a personal perspective. He's going to mention this, and then he's probably going to poo-poo whatever deal was put in place by any other country without him at the table. That's my guess. Now, there's very little that's going to motivate him to make a deal, if you will, at this point. He said yesterday in this meeting with Carney, he says, we don't even need any trade. And he wasn't referring just to Canada. He was talking generally. It was a striking conversation. I don't know if your viewers, have seen the readouts or the tapes of these conversations. It was quite striking.
Harry, speaking of these striking conversations, I'm curious, as Guy kind of pointed out, the markets are bracing for any impact that we hear from the Swiss meetings, any kind of repercussions we hear, or any sort of dialogue we hear from the EU, from the UK. What is the pain point as we sit here in London? You're joining us from DC. What is the pain point that the rest of the world can hit when it comes to the United States? So far, we're only talking about goods. Should we be talking about services, financial markets, treasuries? What is the number one pain point the rest of the world can touch?
Well, I think the number one pain point is just to reduce the temperature of what's going on in trade policy on the part of the U.S. I think that's really the pain point. They want to look for progress somewhere. I don't think they're not even going to be pressing for a double click on that. If there was just some kind of lowering the temperature and Trump or his deputy saying, we had a really good conversation, we're going to meet again, there's momentum here. That's what I would draw as sort of the best outcome of this meeting, which would calm emotions in global markets. I don't know whether it will calm emotions here in Washington, at least in the White House, but that would be really helpful because the atmospherics now are really quite problematic. I've never seen this kinds of emotions impacting trade conversations at such a high level at the heads of state. It's as I say, it's quite striking. So I think everyone's on tenterhooks just to see some kind of momentum, even if it's marginal.
Harry, yesterday, Paul Tudor-Jones described what we are seeing in terms of the tariff story as the biggest tax hike the United States economy has witnessed since the 1960s. Is that the right way of thinking about it?
I think in part, but I think it's really important to sort of unbundle a domestic tax issue from international relations and the taxes, essentially the analog on trade, because listen, the world, the U.S. is the number one economy in the world, and the fact that it's floundering from a policy perspective, I think is really quite troubling emotionally. For traders, for investors, for workers, for consumers, at least it is here in the United States, and I suspect it is in other economies around the world. So people are just looking for the temperature to drop down, but I think more importantly, to have the President of the United States act rationally about what does he want and what does it take to move from A to B.